I don't really even need to tell you the importance of kickers in fantasy football. You know they're important, especially now more than ever, when every point matters in your fantasy playoffs. So we're going through our top 12 kickers today. Just go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now getting into our first tier right here, I've got Chris Boswell here at number 1. For obvious reasons, this guy's been the number 1 kicker for the majority of the year. He's definitely got the highest ceiling on a weekly basis of any kicker. But I will tell you this is the first real week that I've had concern with Chris Boswell. This Eagles matchup, I don't expect the Steelers to put up a ton of points because not only is the Eagles defense playing really good football right now, but they're also missing George Pickens on offense. They can't move the ball as well. Against the Browns, that was proof of that. They just had a much easier matchup last week. This week is not the same. So I do have concerns about this one, but it's not enough to just make me move off of Chris Boswell. If you've gotten this far with Chris Boswell, you just continue to ride it with him because he has the highest ceiling. And at number 2, I feel similar to Ka'imi Fairbairn. You know, the funny thing about Ka'imi Fairbairn actually is that he doesn't have one of the higher ceilings. Like, he does have a high ceiling of like 15 to 16 to 17 points some weeks, but he doesn't have like a 20-point explosion week like some guys like Will Lutz and, you know, like a Cameron Dicker has. He doesn't have that. What he has is consistency because this Texans offense can't put the ball in the end zone every time. Their red zone efficiency is not particularly good. So I do think that Ka'imi Fairbairn will have a good amount of yardage and a good amount of points to kick from versus the Miami Dolphins here coming off a bye week at home. And then I think Jason Sanders is a great kicker this week. Listen, I've been saying for weeks now with Jason Sanders. Jason Sanders has become a really good kicker in fantasy football ever since to return to this lineup. Jason Sanders, since week 9 points, 15, 11, 12, 3, and 16. The only game he was bad at was the Green Bay Packers game when he was kicking a rock in Lambeau Field, and I left him out that week because I've got this guy pinned down. This is a good matchup for him. They're in Houston. It's in a dome. Weather's not a factor here for the Miami Dolphins. I expect Jason Sanders to be able to kick at least 3 field goals in this game. I think he's a great play this week. And dropping down to our next tier, I've got Jake Bates here at number 4, taking on the Buffalo Bills. And listen, with Jake Bates, you know, it's kind of a Ka'imi Fairbairn thing, except he doesn't quite have as high of a ceiling as Ka'imi Fairbairn does. But ever since the bye week, in week 6, he came back 19 points, 8 points, 12, 6, 12, 12, 8, 12, 11. Like, basically, he's been hitting, you know, anywhere between 8 to 12 points on a weekly basis. So this one, I expect to be more of a high-scoring matchup, which makes me want in on Jake Bates. And Jake Bates is very consistent, so I feel like he's a really safe play this week to get you about 10 to 12 fantasy points. And at number 5, I've got Will Lutz. Will Lutz versus the Indianapolis Colts, I think is fantastic. Now, the one problem with Will Lutz, and the reason I ultimately opted to rank him below guys like Jason Sanders and Jake Bates, is because of the fact that he's more streaky than those two guys are. Now, with Will Lutz in particular, he's had over his past month 2 points, 9 points, 22, and 11. So his ceiling and floor, they're very, very different. Now, I think this is a great matchup against the Indianapolis Colts. It's in Denver. I see this being a really good week for Will Lutz. But this almost feels like a shot in the dark to me a little bit. Like, it does worry me the fact that he has not been consistent even in good matchups like versus the Atlanta Falcons when he had 9 points in fantasy. So I like the matchup. I'm ultimately going to say he belongs inside the top 5, but I do not trust him, and he feels like more of a shot in the dark to me. And at number 6, Will Reichard. Will Reichard of the Minnesota Vikings comes back last week and does pretty well, all things considered, versus the Chicago Bears this week. Now listen, Will Reichard actually had one of his worst games of the year last week when he had 6 fantasy points. But here's the thing with Will Reichard is that the Atlanta Falcons, like, they couldn't stop a nosebleed last week. So you know what he did? He kicked 6 extra point attempts. And he had 1 field goal attempt, which he missed. Now, that's a problem, obviously. That's why he's down here a little bit lower. But versus the Chicago Bears, I expect him to get opportunities for both extra points and field goals. Now, the Vikings offense, they have become a little bit more efficient over the past several weeks. But I will say that I do believe that Will Reichard versus the Chicago Bears will end up ultimately being a good play, with ultimately ultimately a really safe floor between 6 to 8 points and a ceiling of about 15 to 16. So let me just tell you about my buddy over at Giddy Up Sports. He's a great guy, and he really did develop a need that even I struggle with as a solo fantasy YouTuber. A lot of the times I'm making videos at night and recording them and editing them at night, so I ultimately sometimes forget in my personal leagues to set up my waiver wire how I want it to look in the morning. And it ends up I don't get any of the players I want, and it's super frustrating. So what Giddy Up Sports did is they essentially made this really smart waiver automation process that executes the precise timing-based player acquisitions, and essentially you can get the guys that you need. And it also preserves your valuable waiver priority for premier players that you want to get on a weekly basis. So essentially with this automation, you can set up your waiver claims ahead of time, even days or weeks before that, and you can set up the exact time that you want to claim that player. Again, this is particularly useful for myself since I am a one-man show here at Football Fanalysts Network, and sometimes I don't have time to make the waiver claims at night. This is a great way to do it ahead of time. Now, as of right now, this is only available for Yahoo Fantasy Football Leagues, but if you are in a Yahoo League and you want to use a product like this, I'm telling you, it will help you out so much heading into the fantasy playoffs. Just go to GiddyUpSports.com and make sure to maximize your waiver claims. Now, dropping out to our next tier right here, I've got Matthew Wright or Harrison Butker, whichever one of them decides to play. So Harrison Butker is technically eligible to come off the IR. His Wednesday practice report was that he was limited, and Andy Reid was a little bit non-committal about whether he was going to return or not. I thought I was going to expect Harrison Butker to play, to be honest with you, if you want to know the truth. But Matthew Wright has done really well for the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, ultimately, that doesn't factor into their Harrison Butker decision. But my point being that Harrison Butker, if he plays, this is a great matchup for both of them. At Cleveland here, and Matthew Wright is averaging 14.3 fantasy points per game. Like, this guy has done excellent. He's had 2 games with them, 14 and 16 fantasy points. This offense is kicking tons of field goals because they always get down there. That's not the problem. The problem is effectiveness of getting into the end zone. So this offense here is great for fantasy kickers. So whoever it is, I want in on this matchup versus Cleveland. And then Brandon Aubrey at number 8. I think Brandon Aubrey, honestly, is a solid play this week. I actually expected to be higher on the list when I was ranking these guys out initially, but it just turned out I liked several kickers' upside more than Aubrey's this week. Because the good thing with Aubrey is that ever since Dak Prescott went down and Cooper Rush became the quarterback, it's been a very consistent front from Brandon Aubrey. But when his upside games, those are gone because Dak is not there anymore, so he doesn't have upside for 21 points. That's the problem with Brandon Aubrey. Now, he does have upside for like 12 points, and that's also very good numbers right there. But ultimately, against the Carolina Panthers, I do view this as a very safe matchup. Like, Brandon Aubrey, honestly, I believe is one of the safer plays of the entire week. I think he's got a floor of around 7 to 8 points this week, and a ceiling of probably 12 to 13. But that is just the problem here, is that, you know, with this offense, they can't score many points. It's either going to be a big play or they'll get down there probably in range and Brandon Aubrey will kick a really long field goal. So I do think that Brandon Aubrey is a really safe play this week. And then at number 9, I've got Cam Dicker this week. Now listen up. Cam Dicker is a great kicker in fantasy. He's the kicker number 4 right now. And, you know, most of his past month has been great. Now, last week versus Kansas City, he went downhill. He had 5 fantasy points. And that's also, like, that matchup's not particularly great. It's a divisional matchup. Kansas City usually lives up to those divisional matchups. But at the same time here, this offense, like, if they don't have Ladd again, it's going to be so hard for them to move the ball. I mean, it was so hard for them to move the ball against the Kansas City Chiefs. So I just kind of think, like, I have real reservations here with Cameron Dicker as long as J.K. Dobbins is out and as long as Ladd is out, because they have no playmakers and Justin Herbert is banged up. So I do have significant issues with Cam Dicker. Even though the matchup should be theoretically better versus the Bucs defense, I still got my issues with Cam Dicker. Dropping down to our last tier, I've got Anders Carlson. Anders Carlson, my friend, at number 10 at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Listen up. Anders Carlson, since joining the New York Jets, you know what he's been doing? Let me just tell you. 11 points, 1 point, 16 points. One bust week, and that's going to kill your week. But his ceiling of 16 points, that's a great ceiling right there. And here's the honest truth about the Jets situation. All year, they've been dying. This offense has been dying for a good kicker. And this offense has had potential all year for a great fantasy football kicker. Greg Zuerlein was a disgrace, and they haven't been able to figure it out until now. Now they've got Anders Carlson, who's actually kicking really well for them. So with Anders Carlson, this matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, you need to look at this differently. The matchup is fantastic, obviously. And number two, this Jets offense has enough talent to get you down there several times a week. They just can't always finish a drive. So that's where you get a good kicker, and Anders Carlson has turned out to be that. I believe Anders Carlson is a really good play this week. Jason Myers at number 11. Versus the Green Bay Packers, it's Sunday night. Now listen, with Jason Myers here, I've been discussing this, this surge that we've been seeing from the Seattle Seahawks over the last several weeks. And Jason Myers has followed the lead of this entire team over the last month. 12 points, 6 points, 11 and 12. So that's a little bit Jake Bates-esque, except with a little bit of a lower floor, and that's why he's down here. Now, Green Bay, I think they will play them very tough. Green Bay is fighting for seeding this point, probably as a wild card team, but Seattle is fighting equally to win the division. So I think this is going to be kind of a dogfight a little bit, and that's kind of why I like Jason Myers' opportunity to kick, 2 or 3 field goal attempts along with 2 or 3 extra point attempts. I think this is a really good matchup for Jason Myers ultimately, but I do have slight concerns about just how inconsistent the offense has typically been over the majority of the year. And at number 12 to round us all out here, Chase McLaughlin at number 12. At the Los Angeles Chargers this week, Chase McLaughlin is a very scary play. I've been kind of discussing this over the last month or two, I would say. Chase McLaughlin, over the last actually several weeks, he's had one double-digit game, and that was against Carolina when he had 16 points. But that's just the thing. He can give you that type of week. So he's got those spike weeks in him. And I think that this matchup could be one of those games because the Chargers defense, they will stop them for very few points as far as touchdowns go. I would say 2 touchdowns is probably max for the Tampa Bay Bucks on Sunday versus the Chargers. But on the other hand, I think 3 field goals, maybe 4, is a very strong possibility here. So I think his ceiling is really high, but there's no argument from me with 4 points, 6 points, 8, 7, 8, 5. That's a lower floor than I would like to put, so that's why he's at number 12. So let me know how your lineup is starting to look this week, and if you want to see the top 12 defenses for this week, click on this video right here.